if you're not going to finish the journey, don't bother starting it, because it's a difficult one. But for me, it's the only way. Going into your pain, I think that's the way I see it, is like, I didn't realize how much pain I had from my past that I hadn't dealt with. Like, I was going through life, like working in IT and happy enough with the job and all that, and mates and going drinking, and I wasn't like struggling too much. But then it was only when I took the time to travel, well, you did as well. So it was when I was by myself, taking that quiet time by myself and really looking back at myself from an objective view, maybe. And I started realizing all this shit started coming up then in them quiet moments from my past, where the little boy in me was not healed properly. And I suppose through different experiences I've had, a lot of that stuff has come up, and I've been able to look at it and face it and kind of work through it and accept those parts of myself that I probably was trying to. I think I was an overachiever when I was younger. I was trying to achieve things and get the good job so I'd be worthy of love. But I felt that I just had to come around to accepting who I was and that scared young boy in me. So, and then, as you talked about, I don't think a lot of people even realize the peace that comes after that, after you go through that. And like, as Darryl, he went down his path, he went to the bottom. But once he came out of that and through that and felt his pain and dealt with it, then that's where the real joy, you can really love someone, you can really experience pure joy and peace. And I think it's even more than happiness, it's just peace. I think it's what I've really found.
One of my mentors for a long time was a Wexford hurler called George O'Connor, who would have played from the late 70s until the mid 90s, when he finished his Roy of the Rovers career with an Ireland win, playing midfield in the All-Ireland final. And George has had his difficulties and had to face some of those demons as well. It's not an easy life for the role of the hero is not an easy tag, I think, to hold, because I think sometimes you inherit people's own the broken promises of their past, the things that they didn't honor in themselves, they begin to put on somebody else. You know, they put these people up on a pedestal, and George was one of those, and that inevitably, I think, causes problems. But he described it in a very simple but very lovely way that I've never forgotten. He talked about this kind of line that we're in, and you kind of oscillate up and down, like this is happiness and this is sadness, this is happiness and this is sadness. And at some stage on that journey, like you're up and down, all of a sudden you go boom, like you break that bottom line and you go down into all your, you go into the dark waters, as they call it. But on the way up out of that, then you don't go back up into this little oscillation, you boom, like it goes back up here. The lines just evaporate, they're gone. The limitation of what you think is happiness is gone. And all of a sudden you come into this vast ocean of happiness that's much more life sustaining. You know, it just allows you to be in the world in a kind of in a much more balanced, but in a happier way. And yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. Like,
yeah, that's an amazing way to put it. Actually, it's a great kind of analogy for it. We just wanted to kind of give people listening something to maybe like a book maybe that you'd recommend that maybe helped you on your journey or made you see things differently.
Nostos by John Moriarty. Don't go near that one. Don't go near it until you're ready. John Moriarty has I'd say maybe 10 or 12 books, and he also has a set of CDs called One Evening in Eden. There's 10 of them in it, and it amounts to about 10 hours or 12 hours of him just kind of freestyling about his relationship with his own wildness and with the wildness around him in the world. It's deeply, deeply philosophical and spiritual. It's certainly not everybody's cup of tea, but he has a book called Dreamtime, and he has another one called Invoking Ireland, and those two books are a step in to the world that he sees. I mean, when I came down to Kerry first, I was really struggling, and I was on my own. I was living in a small house in just past Ballyferriter, in a place called Ballincollig, and my phone didn't work down there, and I had no car, and I isolated myself way, way beyond what's healthy, I'd say. But I found Moriarty in that time, and he gave me permission to see the world as I see it, to not look for other people's interpretation of it, to not look for to not bow down to the scientists and the experts who say that it's this and it's that. He gave me permission to go out into it and to feel it and to see it and to observe it and to be with it in a way that allowed the societal part of me that had been lassoed and that had been broken a little bit by society. He allowed that noose to just fall away and to begin to see things a little bit clearer and a little bit more beautifully, I suppose. One of the titles of 3 of those CDs is called Seeking to Walk More Beautifully on the Earth. And there's an invite, how light is your footprint? Both ecologically, but also in your social relationships. How beautiful can you be on the earth, and if you have a role, if you a predetermined or predestined role, or a role that just unfolds in front of you that you have to play, can you play that role beautifully? Can you play it with grace and with poise? There's a wholesale rejection socially at the moment of anything to do with the Catholic Church, for obvious reasons. There's a language associated with the church because it held it held the role of the guardians of spirituality in this country for so long, that it's kind of the baby in the bathwater situation. Like, it's all gone out. He speaks in a very spiritual language that if you want to be lazy about it, you can reject it. If you want just to be, okay, this is what the bandwagon says about the church, and sure, didn't they molest the boys and sell the little babies, and sure, that's everything, then I don't need to know anything more about that. Those things are tragedies, and certainly in no way to be taken lightly in terms of the Catholic Church, but that's the institution. What's behind it is not the institution. I'm talking about a man. This is a man who was hearing hosannas in his last days, like the music of the universe. Like, he could hear it. He went to that place. He went to a different dimension of Ireland almost, and is writing from that dimension back to us to say, this is what it's like. Now, I mean, to know that that's there, and all he's saying is to go out into it, and to not have a timetable, to not have to come back in an hour to get your dinner or whatever, to head off for 6 or 7 hours or 6 or 7 days or whatever it is, like the native Indians used to do with that's actually been done again and will be done here again soon as well. The journeys that they take out into nature to find their spirit animal or whatever it is, like, that's obviously something that's quite prevalent for you fellas, like, where you would go on a vision quest, and you would find your totem, you would find your animal, you would find your plant, whatever it is. I mean, that's again, like, and it's a phrase he uses very often. That's great news. Like, that's the great news from West Kerry today, lads. Like, there's people who've gone over into that dimension of Ireland, this magical landscape that we're fucking tearing apart on a daily basis by putting concrete, something that doesn't breathe, that there's no life in it, you're putting it on top of this beautiful sacred ground. I mean, get away from that for a while. And that is, and you're right there, that's been the great gift of the lockdown, is that people have reconnected. Like, people have gone back out into the wild places because they've had nothing else to do, and they've had to do it because there's no people there, and that's what you can do. And it's been hugely beneficial to them. And everybody who tells me that hunches their shoulders. They all do the very same thing. They hunch their shoulders, like, don't tell anybody, but this has been great for me. I've reconnected to myself. I've reconnected to my kids. I've reconnected to the land around me. I've reconnected to my place. I understand my place again. And it's been magnificent for them. That's not to say there isn't suffering. Of course there's suffering, but there's always suffering. There's always suffering. Like, but that doesn't mean everything should be, that doesn't mean you can't still do those things. So that's what's happening. And I think because there's been a kind of a full stop on a certain way of being, now it's ripe Now it's ripe for what you're doing. The conditions are now ripe to say, right, let's charter a new way. Because I don't think we can, I don't anyway, personally, I don't trust the people who brought us to the place that we've come to. I just have stopped trusting them because they keep telling me lies and they keep saying things that sound good, but nothing ever really happens. So there's only so often, and you have to be quite gullible to constantly go back to the same place that keeps telling you lies. Like, you know, I just don't think it's realistic to keep doing that if you want to find some kind of um, balance in your life, you know. So that's been a huge there's a huge opportunity for what you're doing. There's a huge opportunity for what I'm doing. There's a huge opportunity to bring people out who are maybe a little bit uncertain about dipping their toe in the lakes of Clarny, to say this is good news, and there is a way past, there is a way beyond that little small self who's afraid, the little unhealed child who's afraid. He can be taken by the hand and he can be led out into the wild places, and those wild places will be medicine for him. And in the plants and in the animals and in the grass, there's medicine in all of that too. Just in front of me here, slánlus, the plant of healing, Casher Vaughan, Dant de Leon, healing. We are surrounded by medicine. And what are we doing? Going into fucking chemists and buying a heap of drugs that we keep fucking taking more and more, because that's what they do. They just shut stuff down and then it comes back in some other form, you know. But this stuff around us, like, okay, you need to take a little bit more time. You won't heal in a day. It may take 3 days, but that's the natural way. And there's nothing wrong with that, you know. So I'm tremendously hopeful that we're returning to that. And I only hope, and it's only a hope, that it's not too late to stem the tide of disconnection that we've had towards the natural world, you know.
I love that. I love the way you put that. That's, yes, same as myself. I think it's so important for us to get back to nature now, and myself and Daryl have been going into nature a lot as well. So definitely going to keep doing it more this summer. One thing we wanted to ask you: what's going on now with your retreats and stuff?
It's a difficult one, Cormac, because every bone in my body wants to just start running retreats 6 months ago, you know, to defy. I want to defy, like I do. I want to defy because I don't. I know there's a disease. I understand the use of and the benefit of vaccines and those things. Like, I understand that whole model like that, and that's all very relevant in some version of reality. But I also feel that, like, it's just time to reconnect to something little bit deeper. We have here a tool that is totally underused, almost unused, except for a very small number in the language, that helps us to see, like, on that journey home that Moriarty's talking about, the signs are written in Irish. The signs are written Oscailge. They have in them, because of the ancientness of the language, because of the roots of the language, the one that Sanskrit shares in India, because of the commonalities, because of the resonances within the words. They are a medicine. They have direction in them for us. Now, again, you have to let go of this lazy mindset, and I don't mean that critically being lazy. I have it still in me as well, and it's a lazy mindset. This is the Mochanílach, like, this is the prepositions and the pronouns of Irish that I can't seem to grasp, or this is the tenses that I don't understand, or this is the shit feeling that I have when I speak to a Caintor Dúchais, somebody down here who speaks poetry at me and is telling me about their day, you know, and I'm left there with my broken, my what is fine compared to what I'm from. Like, I didn't have Irish growing up, like, and it's getting better all the time in some respects, but it's really ripe as well, I feel, at the moment. Manacon McGann has just written an incredible book called "There's 32 Words for the Field" in Irish. There are 32 words for the field in Irish, depending on what's happening in the field. And that's, see, there's not, a field is like an inanimate thing. That's just a field, like. But in Irish, If that field is fallow, it has a word. If that field has horse in it, it has a word. If that field has cows in it, if that field had cows in it last year but doesn't this year, there's another word for that. And that's not, people maybe you might feel kind of overwhelmed by that, and it might
Yeah.
trigger the old leave insert fear of Irish or whatever. But what he's saying is like, we can, that's, do you see what I mean when I say the keys to nature? It's like, okay, now I know infinitely more about that field based on one word. Now I know what I now I know the quality of the soil, or now I know what's happened in that field over the last few years or whatever. And that's rife. That is rife in the language. That kind of descriptiveness that
Yeah.
honors the field for what it is, not as an economic entity in my mind, a piece of land.
Mm-hmm.
Moriarty has a fantastic word, and this is the brazenness of the man. He wasn't happy with landscape. He was going off out into onto the mountains in Killarney or Connemara, wherever he was, and the landscape. He said this word kept coming up, the landscape, and the land is an economic entity. That's where the word is, the word, the etymology is rooted in the notion of it being this like manageable economic entity, and scape being within your vision, so the ability to see this controllable economic entity. So he wasn't happy with that word, so he decided he needed a new word for it because that wasn't good enough. And uh, the word that he came up with was a tomophony. He decided that it was a tomophony. Now, tauma comes from, I think it's a Greek word. There's the epiphany, which is a wonder, and tauma being a kind of an unfolding, a continuous unfolding. So what he was saying was, I'm stepping out into a continuous unfolding of wonder. That's not an inanimate thing. That is moving. That rock, as inanimate as it seems, is something that is unfolding and has a movement in it, and I'm going to allow for that in what I call it, because what I call it allows me to see it that way. And the language, the Irish language, is the same. It gives that kind of life. Now, I know I've gone on a total and utter rant from a very simple question, but it's really important to give a bit of context, I suppose. What we're doing with the Wild Irish Retreat is rewilding Oscoilge. There's a few aspects to it. One of them being men. In like it's for both, obviously, but I find working with men in it that we're very good shoulder to shoulder doing something. And we've taken that attitude to it. We're not sitting down in front of each other trying to learn the tenses. What we're trying to do is invite the language out. So we start with a yoga nidra, where you bring people down to a level of relaxation where we begin to address the healing that's required and how they see the language, that broken vision of it that they have from the leave insert. And then we move into wild food foraging, out on the rocks, collecting the seaweed, down by the rivers, playing hurling matches, collecting wild medicines, wild plants, making salves, making creams. That's Siobhan and Carol who we work with. That's their department more. We play a game of hurling on the beach. We go in for a swim in the sea afterwards. We do yoga in the morning, meditation in the morning to set our day. All the food is organic and or wild. And it's really just it's a weekend of healing. It's a weekend that's what, and we do a sweat lodge, a purification ceremony essentially on the Saturday night, where we sweat, and we sweat away things that we need to get rid of in order to invite the things that we need in. And we do all that through Irish. And people think at the start of the weekend, the terror, oh God, the poor unfortunates, the terror. But you'll be in such admiration for them, because Jesus, like, to put yourself in that position is not easy. It's not easy to not be able to articulate, to take 2 minutes to say something that should only take 2 seconds. That's really difficult, but they do it. And there's a wide variety of standards. You need to have some basis in the language. You can't just come in with nothing, because there's nothing for you there. It's an opportunity to rewild. It's an opportunity to take a break, and it's an opportunity to invite out of you what you need, as opposed to thinking I have to bring in what I need. It's really honoring what's inside and to invite that out. And the language is one of the ways to show that that's actually already there for you. So we're going to do a retreat in Clare on the 23rd Carol, who we run them with, has a plot of land on the Burren that she bought for a ridiculously low price, and is living on it, off the back of a 200-acre hazelwood. That's just magical, and she has planted beds and leveled places around just for it to be for her to live there. Like, she built a little bahan as well, but for her to live there in time. And we're going to have a camping retreat, which we've never done before. We usually have a center down here that we use, but this is a little bit wilder out to go out into it. And the information's on. There's not much information about it because we are waiting to see what the different rules are at that time. But we do feel that it's time to move on. We do feel that it's time to move on in some respects, because people are ready for it, and there's people who maybe have issue with that, and that's unfortunate. But yeah, we're trying to balance all things.
Yeah. Sounds amazing. Yeah, I'd love to definitely do one of them at some stage myself.
We'll definitely be heading down to us at some point. Yeah. It's funny, like you were saying about the Irish language. I was watching your documentary there a while back, the TG4.
Yeah.
And I was watching it with my girlfriend Aoife. We were just watching on the laptop at home, and since watching that, because I think nearly everybody else was speaking English, and you were speaking Oscarga in the documentary, and like, whatever it was about watching that, I just said to Hope, why don't we, like, I know people get inspired in the moment when they're watching it and stuff.
Yeah.
We're like, okay, from now on, we're only speaking Oscarga in the apartment and stuff, But since watching that, genuinely, she got in contact with her auntie, who is a Gaeilge up in Fulcara in Donegal, to actually ask what the best way, because I definitely have a basis of the language, but it's like, what's the best way to start integrating it? And she's given us a few links to different things. I said that to Cormac Gunny this morning, and him and his girlfriend had spoke about doing it as well when they're going traveling in the van, to just only speak Oscarga. Like you said, there is some sort of magic to it. Like when you're speaking it, like I don't know, it feels right. It just feels it feels like what you should be, the way you should be speaking.
For me, I feel almost ashamed that I can't speak it properly. It's like you go traveling and meeting other people from different countries, and you can't even speak your own language, and they speak 3 or 4. So it's definitely something that I said I'd do it a few times, but I think this year maybe.
I think like you have to go easy on yourself anyway. That's the first thing. Like, and fucking let go of that shame anyway. That has to go, because it's going to be, that's the overriding feeling that you associate with the language then. So that has to go. There's a reason you're where you're at with it, and that is fine. And there's no shame in that whatsoever. Like I had that feeling myself, of the shameful feeling of, I had a fella in America talking to me in Irish. He was an American, and I couldn't even answer. I'm like, oh God, shame. Like, but anyway, the things that you're interested in, TG Car is a wealth of fantastic programming, and the things that you're interested in, just put them on. Just watch. Just even have them in the background. Put on Radio na Gaeltacht and have it in the background. The news is rubbish anyway in English. Just put it on in Irish. It doesn't sound nearly as bad. If you just have it, I think one of the things definitely is to watch programs you're interested in, because you speak the language of the things that you're interested in, and they're just topping you up, and subconsciously it's going in. So you're not sitting down to learn, you're not engaging that part of your brain. It's just infusing itself into you. And if it's already in there, which it's in your lineage, so it is already in there, no matter how far back you go, it's in there. So it just have it around you a little bit more, have the radio on a little bit more. And then like short, like I can't speak to Siobhan. I can't articulate myself in Irish the same way as I can in English. Because I'm not a kind or Dukish. It's not I didn't grow up with it. I came to it at 23 or 4. Like, now it took me 3 days for that splunk, like for that switch where my brain kicked in and said, oh wow, I can actually, this will come out. It'll come out wrong, but I don't care. It's going to come out. That took 3 days from being embarrassed and struggling and not feeling good and not being able to say anything, to all of a sudden waking up, having a dream in Irish, and then being able to have basic conversations. Like, that's a massive thing. So start slow, like try a conversation over a meal or something and have the dictionary and just be looking and be be curious about the language, you know. But start like simple and let it build slowly, because that's, you know yourselves, like anything that you do, like you meet the fellas who are coming in pumping iron for 3 weeks, like in January, and then they're gone in February and they're back on the lash, like, because it's just too much. Like, you just need to, it needs to be drip fed a little bit, and to not be in any way hard on yourself on it, like, you know. And then find communities of learners. They are there, they're online, unfortunately, at the moment. You make what you want of that, but they will be out soon again. And there are considerable groups in Dublin, the pop-up Gaeltacht movement and things like that, where people are gathering who aren't very capable at speaking it, who don't have great command of it, but they're doing it, and they're amongst people who have a great command of it and who are only willing, much like we said earlier when I had the moment on the cliff, and much like you were talking about, Darryl, when you found your gold, they just want to share it. That's all they want to do. They just want to share it. Like, people think there's an arrogance sometimes, or Irish speakers look down on English speakers and stuff. It's just not my experience. I don't know about other people, but certainly not my experience. Since I've come down here, the gratitude that the speakers of Irish down here show to you for trying to communicate them, however, in whatever tense you're trying to communicate them with, however wrong it is, they're just so grateful. And I mean, Jesus, like, that's lovely, you know. So it's fair play, and it's a lovely thing to hear it, Darryl. It's a lovely thing to hear from the TUI, but to look at the documentary and to say afterwards, if I wanted anybody to take anything away from any of those things, it's like that they would say, geez, maybe I can give that a go. Like, maybe it's not so hard after all, you know.
Definitely. And we just want to end with 2 quick questions. What's your definition of success?
I'd say not having a definition of success. I don't know. I don't have a definition of it. I mean, living from my purpose, like, is my life aim. Living authentically, like, authentically responding to the moment, to be on the creative edge, and authentically respond to that. But I fail at that so often that I don't know. It's like I'm admitting to myself that I'm not a success or something in those terms, you know. But I, like, the same as I was talking with the Irish Free fellas, it's just like, I am where I am, like, you know. I live with a woman who is tremendously creative and who only wants ever to be is totally uncomfortable if she's not on the creative edge, actually. She just always wants to be on the creative edge of life, and always responding and always playful and always looking for opportunities to do accents or do a dance move or whatever it is, just always looking, you know. And I have huge admiration for that, but I feel like at times I fall tremendously short in it. So that's something I'm trying to invite in more, and trying to be a little bit looser in, and not be as judgmental and as hard on myself about. So in terms of success, it is to respond authentically to life, and to live my purpose. But I don't know, my purpose maybe changes. I feel like I'm on it sometimes, and there's other times I'm like, you're an imposter, like, you know, you're a fake, this is not real, or you're trying to show something that's not true, you know. So it's I find it very hard to nail that one down. But for the moment, I feel that there's it's reflected back to me maybe in my kids, and it's reflected back to me by my community, that look at, we're grateful for some of the things that you're doing, and keep doing them. And sometimes I find myself trusting that in those moments of doubt, you know.
I think that's a great definition. I think once you're true to yourself, living authentically to yourself, you're not going to regret decisions made from that place. And you're gonna,
but Jesus, hard, Cormac.
oh yeah, I'm not saying I can do it either.
Like, Jesus, it's hard, but it's that's the aspiration, or that's the journey itself, you know.
Exactly.
Now, there's just one last question, and that would be: is there any particular piece of advice that you give to your younger self, your teenage self?
I remember doing a practice with Soar, And I remember the two people who did it with me, and I'll forever remember them because I had never done it before. I had never admitted this to myself, I suppose. And it was after a long journeying process of like kind of a meditation and visualization stuff that the guy Tom had run with us. And it involves meeting your younger self. But you go on the physical experience, not the physical experience, but obviously, but like you visualize it very intently. And the piece of advice that he had for me, that I had for him, and that he also had for me, both my 5 or 6 year old self, he has some advice for you too, you know, and you also have some advice for him. But it was the same message for me. For some people, it's different, but for me, it was to not be so hard on myself. Just to not be so hard on myself. I'd say to my younger self, don't be so hard on yourself. I mean, when we play hurling down here, one of the things that I say to the lads so effortlessly, because it makes so much sense to me in hurling, and maybe not always in life, is your body is learning. The muscles are learning. You, with your head and your social sense of yourself and who you are in the high street, is not valuable here. Your body is at learning. Get out of the way. And the way you get out of your way is by not measuring and judging yourself. So when you make a mistake, allow your body to learn that mistake. The next time it comes, the body will respond differently because it didn't want to miss it the last time. But if you fill that void, that moment when you miss it, with self-criticism and with judgment, you deny the channels flowing to learn the lesson. It's a real indictment in some respects of that, because what I'm saying essentially to you now is like, I am too hard on myself. I fill those moments and I fill those voids too often with a form of, with a self-criticism that you have to mask as self-aggrandizement or something else, you know, and that's non-authentic then. So it's a big question. Like it's a big question. But it's certainly, hurling has taught me. Yeah, hurling continues to give. Like hurling teaches me that's one of the ways where I see it very clearly, I suppose, is that once the event happens, your entity learns something. But if you fill that with the same old voice, the same old critic, the same old that fella who's in there who hasn't healed or hasn't been healed or hasn't been recognized yet, when you allow him to have his say all the time, then you deny yourself the great learnings, you know. So that's the unfolding journey at the moment, and that's one of the purposes, is to root him out and to say thanks very much for everything you've done for me, but I'm not going to go that way anymore, you know.
Look, I'm glad I asked you that question. Seems we're going to take that on board. I never really thought of it that way. You know,
I actually did have a similar experience before, going back to, I think it was in a visualization, going back to my younger self, and it was exactly the same thing. Don't be too hard on yourself. Don't be so hard on yourself. That's what I got. So that's why I was smiling when you said it.
That's
I still struggle to do it though. Yeah.
That's why I struggle with that a lot. That's why I'm going to try to take that on board, because sometimes I'm thinking I need to criticize myself like that to learn from the mistake, but instead just letting it flow.
Recognizing the voice. Like it's amazing when you look at now with neuroplasticity, and what they're discovering with neuroplasticity is that's like a little small, that's a branch, like a tree, you know. Your brain is like a big tree, and a little branch grows off, and if you fail at something and a bit of criticism comes in and that voice takes hold, that branch kind of grows a bit stronger, and every time that branch gets stronger and stronger. So eventually the only way the energy will flow is down there. Whereas when you become conscious of that voice, say, oh, there's that voice again, right? Not today. I'm going to catch you, and I might still go down it a little bit, like, but I'm catching him, and I'm observing him doing it. Then the branch begins to weaken bit by bit, and eventually that branch breaks off, and your mind flows in a different direction, and that's the movement of the physical process in the brain of that happening. So that's a I think it's a good one to be aware of, you know, to catch that critic, because he can be very destructive.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks a million, Diarmuid, for coming on and chatting to us. I think was so much in that for people to get from it. And I just wanted to say, you are a very inspiring character for me, because I think you resemble a lot of the good qualities that I'd like to embody, or that I strive to embody as an Irishman, as a son, as a brother, as hopefully a father someday as well, and as a sports person too. I know we didn't really touch too much in the hurling, but I think you're a great example of that Irish warrior mentality, and you embody that, and the protector of the land and all that. So just wanted to say that we really appreciate you coming on and chatting to us and what you're doing, and definitely love to come down and play a bit of hurling on the beach at some stage.
Yeah, every Sunday, fellas, depending on the low tide.
Yeah, sounds good. Sure.
Sounds good.
But look at, lads, you're doing, that's all. I appreciate that, and I take it on board for sure. And the critics does the imposter steps up and says, "Hey, on there now, you're not doing all that shit at all." But I do feel like you're doing it. You've had the circles, like you're doing it. You've started something and you're doing it, and I'm full of admiration for you for that, for taking that step and for dreaming big. It's bold to dream big, and I sincerely am full of admiration for you for doing that, and for creating those spaces for fellas to come into. Even if you were dragged to it, it doesn't matter. You've been brought to it, and fair play to you. And it's lovely to have Daryl like that fucking straight up honesty as well, early, just get that out, like, and it's only worth responding to then, like, you meet it in kind, and other people will meet it in kind because they'll see it in you too. So it was a pleasure to chat to you, lads. I sent on some pictures there last night. It was very late, when it takes time now sometimes
we'll show up some pictures on the YouTube video.
Yeah.
We sent on a couple of the christening, and just to give people an idea, I suppose, as to what of what that looks like, because it's nice to see it, like.
Yeah, the picture where you're there and the guy, your mate, was up in the rock with the harp and all. That's a
man. He came the following day and played. He just sat up on the sand dunes and played the harp while we played hurling. And my two brothers were down, and there was 3 or 4 lads here who were good, and the standard was unbelievable. And to play a game of hurling to a harp was just, I don't know. It's a part of me would take it over Crow Park, like a big part of me wouldn't, because I love that process too. But a harp going to a game of hurling, I was just like, wow, where are we, or when are we? When are we? Like, it was lovely. It was lovely. So yeah, you're free to, for sure. Set you can post those up, and it'll give people a pictorial insight.
Exactly, yeah. We'll do that for the YouTube for anyone watching. But
right, cool for that.
Thanks
Cheers
again,
for that, David.
David.
Okay, fellas.
We'll be chatting to you.
All right. Take care. Go to